The knock on the door wasn't loud. It was the kind that carries a strange weight, a kind of silence after it that feels more dangerous than the sound itself. I was already awake. I always wake up early. Old habits from a life that never allowed me to rest too long. I was in my nightgown, hair a mess, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tiles, holding a cup of instant coffee I hadn't yet sipped. When the second knock came, stronger this time, the cup slipped from my hands. The sound of it, shattering, was sharp, but not louder than the pounding in my chest. I knew. My heart already knew. 3 men entered without waiting for an invitation. No greetings, no hesitation. Their eyes didn't scan the room like strangers trying to get their bearings. They already knew everything. Where I slept, where I kept my shoes, where I sat to make my morning calls. My name was already on the paper one of them held. Maria Delgado, he said, eyes cold, tone flat. You've been reported to ICE. You need to come with us. The hallway felt like it collapsed inward. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My knees gave out, and I reached for the wall to keep from falling. My body didn't feel like mine anymore. I had always imagined being deported as something loud, chaotic, like in the movies. But this wasn't loud. It was surgical, mechanical, as if they had done this 1,000 times before, and I was just another name to check off a list. They didn't even let me put on my shoes, just grabbed my arms gently but firmly and led me out. I could feel the neighbors watching through their blinds. One of the officers whispered to another and laughed. That's when I asked. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to hear it from them, not just feel it in my bones. Who did this? I asked. My voice came out hoarse, like it hadn't been used in weeks. One of the younger officers didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his clipboard, then back at me. Family member, he said, barely audible. They'll receive $1,000 payment for reporting you. It's part of the community compliance program. And then, without skipping a beat, he turned and opened the van door. $1,000. That was the price of my life. That was the worth of a mother. It was as if every hour I spent scrubbing toilets, washing rich people's clothes, walking home with blisters on my feet so I could save on the bus fare, all of it had been converted into one cold, hard number. $1,000. Do you know what it feels like to be betrayed for that amount? Not by a stranger, not by an enemy, by someone whose diapers you changed, by someone whose forehead you kissed when they had nightmares, by someone you called my baby long after they were grown. The drive to the detention center was silent. I watched the city blur past the window and wondered how many other mothers had sat in that exact spot, wondered if they had also worked their whole lives for their children, only to be thrown away like a piece of trash that had outlived its usefulness. I remembered something my own mother once told me, back in Guatemala, when I was just a teenager and scared of leaving. Children don't always love who feeds them, she said. They love who they want to become. And that's rarely the one who cleans their mess. But I never believed her, not until that moment. At the processing center, everything happened fast. Photos, fingerprints, a bracelet around my wrist with a barcode like I was an item in a supermarket. I tried to remember if I had turned off the stove, if I had fed the cat, if I had called Rosa to tell her I wouldn't make it to clean her kitchen this week. But all of that was gone now. What mattered was that someone I loved had traded me in for a check. They assigned me to a bunk in a crowded room with other women. Most were quiet. Some cried. One looked straight ahead like she hadn't blinked in days. No one asked each other why they were there. We all knew. The reasons didn't matter. Only the silence did. The silence we were forced to carry in place of dignity. That night, I lay awake, staring at the gray ceiling above me. I couldn't cry. I had no more tears left. Instead, I just repeated that number in my head. 1,000, 1,000, like it could somehow make sense. Like if I said it enough, maybe I would wake up and realize this was a nightmare. But it wasn't. I imagined him signing the form. My son, my oldest, the one I named, after my father. I imagined his hand holding the pen, hesitating for just a second. Did he pause? Did he wonder what I would say? What I would feel? Or did he just see the money and a chance to be free of me? You know what hurts most? It's not the arrest, not the cold floor, not the uniform that makes you feel like you've been erased. It's knowing that I made him, with my hands, my heart, my hunger, and he used that same heart to destroy me. If you've ever felt invisible to the people you gave everything to, tell me. I want to hear your story too. Leave a comment with the words "I still matter," because sometimes we forget that we do. And if you want to keep hearing stories that remind us we're not alone, subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For all of us who've been forgotten by the ones we raised. Now, I lay in that bunk with that barcode on my wrist. And for the first time in 62 years, I asked myself the question I never dared to say out loud. What if love isn't always enough? I was never more than a cleaning lady. No diplomas on the wall, no applause when I walked into a room. No one ever clapped when I scrubbed a toilet or wiped the grease off a kitchen counter. But in my heart, I was more than that. I was a mother. A mother who gave everything piece by piece, until there was nothing left but cracked hands and tired bones. I didn't mind. Not once. Because every floor I mopped, every shirt I folded, every window I made shine, it was for them. I arrived in the United States with 1 suitcase and 3 dreams, 1 for each of my children. My youngest still had baby teeth when I left Guatemala. I kissed his tiny fingers goodbye at the airport and promised him I'd send a new pair of shoes for Christmas. I didn't know that it would take me 6 months just to save enough for that 1 pair. But I did it. He never knew how many nights I went to bed with nothing but a glass of water and a prayer. He never knew how many times I walked home from work just to save the $2 for the bus. I cleaned houses that weren't mine, homes with polished wood floors and candles that smelled like vanilla and money. I washed dishes that had never seen hunger. I ironed shirts for women who spent more in 1 lunch than I made in a week. But I smiled, because every dollar I earned meant a little more food on my children's plates. A little more medicine, a little more time. I remember one winter. The heating in my apartment broke. The landlord refused to fix it unless I paid more. I didn't have the money, so I bought a second-hand electric blanket at a thrift store. But then my daughter called from back home. She needed money for school books. I wired her the last $80 I had. That night, I slept in a coat and 3 pairs of socks. I told myself it was just cold, not hunger. You can survive the cold. Hunger feels different. Hunger makes your bones ache in a different way. But I knew the ache of sacrifice was better than the ache of regret. There's something people never talk about. When you're an immigrant mother, you don't get to keep memories for yourself. You send them away. Every birthday I missed, every Christmas I watched from a blurry video call, every moment I wasn't there to hug them, I gave it all up so they could live a little better. I thought that was love. Maybe it still is. My oldest son used to call me his angel. He was 8 when I left. He cried into my skirt and told me he didn't want me to go. I promised I'd come back. I promised I was doing this for him, for them. I didn't know then that my face would become just another rectangle on a phone screen, that my voice would one day sound foreign to them. But still, I worked every single day. I never called in sick, even when I had the flu, even when my back spasmed so bad I had to lean on the kitchen counter just to stand up straight. Because when you clean houses for a living, there are no sick days, no vacations, no second chances. If you miss a day, someone else will take your place. You become replaceable the moment you show weakness. But I refused to be weak. One day, a woman I worked for left a note. She said, "You have magic hands. The floors have never shined like this." I laughed. Magic. If only she knew how those hands looked at night. Swollen, cracked, bleeding sometimes. But maybe she was right. Maybe it is magic. Turning pain into food. Turning loneliness into strength. Turning every insult, every overlooked moment, into fuel to keep going. There was a time when I was proud. Not of the job, but of what I could do with it. Sending school fees, buying uniforms, helping my daughter pay for her first phone. Do you know what it feels like to hear your child say, "Thank you, Mama, I got an A"? It feels like the world starts to make sense again. Like maybe, just maybe, the sacrifice was worth it. I sent packages every month. Shampoo, vitamins, a toy or a jacket. Things I bought secondhand and wrapped in newspaper. I wanted them to feel like I was still there. That even if my arms couldn't hold them, my love could still reach through boxes and borders. But love is a strange currency. It doesn't always hold its value. Not in a world where money speaks louder than memories. And when you give so much for so long, people forget where it came from. They start to believe they earned it, that it was always meant to be theirs, that it's not sacrifice, it's duty. And so, I worked in silence, in shadows, without asking for anything in return. No retirement fund, no recognition. Just the hope that one day, when my children looked at their lives, they'd see me in the foundation. That I would be the quiet strength behind every achievement, every diploma, every smile. If you're someone who has ever worked in silence, giving everything while asking for nothing, I see you. Leave a comment with the words "I gave with love." Your story matters. And if you want to be part of a space where we honor those stories, where we remember the hands that built our futures, subscribe to this channel. Your voice belongs here. Because even a woman with magic hands can be forgotten. Even the strongest heart can be sold for a price. But the truth always remembers who carried the weight. And that truth is still alive in me. His name is Andres Miguel. I named him after my father, a man who taught me how to survive by fixing broken things. Broken chairs, broken doors, broken pride. Andres was born during one of the hardest winters I remember in Guatemala. The power was out for days. We wrapped ourselves in layers of blankets, holding each other close, my newborn son and I, in a little house that shook every time the wind hit it. He was quiet even then. Those deep, dark eyes of his watched everything, as if he knew the world wasn't built to be kind. I used to call him my old soul. He was always the serious one. While his younger siblings played with toys and argued over silly things, Andres would sit by the window, listening to the radio or watching the rain. When I told him stories from my childhood, he listened like a man twice his age. There was a calm in him, a steadiness. I thought it meant he was going to be someone important, someone thoughtful, someone strong. He was 7 when I told him I had to leave. I remember that night. We sat on the floor, just the two of us. The other kids were asleep, curled up on a mattress we all shared. I told him I was going to America to work, to send money so they could eat better, live better, study. His little hands reached out for mine. "But who will braid my sister's hair?" he asked. I smiled and said he would. He looked at me and nodded. "Okay, Mama, I'll do it right." That was Andres, always ready to help, always the protector. After I left, his teachers used to tell me he was the best student in the class, always early, always respectful. When my sister called to say he had won a poetry contest at school, I cried in the kitchen of the house I was cleaning. I used the same rag I was wiping a counter with to dry my tears. Over the years, he became my everything, my reason. Every time I thought I couldn't do one more shift, one more house, I would look at the last photo he sent me and remember why I was here. He was 12 when I sent the money for his first computer, 15 when I paid for his English classes, 18 when I sent the entire savings of that year for him to start university. He wanted to study law, said he wanted to defend people like me, said he would make the world fairer. I believed him. I believed every word, because it came from that same boy who once held my hand and promised to take care of his siblings. When he graduated, I asked someone to help me send a video message. I didn't know how to record one myself, so I paid $10 to a girl at the bus station to film me. I stood in front of the small kitchen in my apartment, holding a bouquet of fake flowers and wearing my cleanest apron. "I'm proud of you, my son," I said, looking into the camera like he was right there. "You did it. And I always knew you would." He didn't reply. Days passed, weeks. Then finally, a message. "Thanks, Mama," it said. "I've been busy." That was when I felt it. The shift. A subtle coldness I hadn't felt before. He still answered my calls, but they got shorter. He used to ask about my health, my job, my landlord. Now it was only money. "Can you send it tomorrow? We're short this month. My car needs a repair." I didn't want to think badly of him. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe life was harder than he let on. But deep down, something inside me tightened. I tried to ignore it. I told myself he was growing, becoming a man, that it was normal for sons to become a little distant. But then, one day, I saw a picture on social media, a birthday party. Andres smiling, surrounded by friends, all dressed up in expensive clothes, balloons, a cake bigger than my fridge. And I was not there. I wasn't even mentioned. Still, I kept giving. Not just money, but belief, because that is what mothers do. We give belief, even when reality begs us not to. I thought that if I kept loving hard enough, he would come back. He would remember. The last time I saw him in person was at a grocery store. It was random. I was shopping for cleaning supplies. He was on the other side of the aisle, wearing a crisp shirt and holding a phone to his ear. Our eyes met. He paused. His expression was blank. He nodded slightly, like he was acknowledging a stranger, then turned away. Just like that, I stood frozen, a bottle of detergent in one hand, the list I had written on a torn piece of paper in the other. My legs didn't move. I wanted to run after him, hug him, ask him if he was okay, but something in his eyes told me not to. He wasn't my boy anymore. He was someone else now, someone I didn't recognize. Do you know how that feels? To stand in the same aisle as your child and feel like a ghost? To realize you raised a man who now sees you as an embarrassment, as something he outgrew? That night, I didn't eat. I sat on my bed, still holding the receipt from the store, reading over it like it held answers. I replayed that moment again and again, trying to understand. When did he stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as a burden? If you've ever looked into the eyes of someone you raised and seen nothing in return, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the Sigh comments with the words "I still believe in love." And if you want to be part of a space where we speak our truths, where the pain of invisible parents is finally heard, subscribe to this channel. You matter more than you know. Because I was never just a mother to Andres. I was his soil, his shelter, his beginning. And sometimes beginnings are forgotten once the road gets comfortable. There is a moment when love begins to change shape. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't scream or crash like a thunderstorm. It seeps in quietly, like a slow leak in a roof. At first it's just a few missed calls, then shorter replies, then silence that feels heavy, not peaceful. The calls from Andres were once my favorite part of the week. He used to start every conversation with, "Hi Mama, how are your hands? Are you drinking enough water?" I would smile even before answering. I used to sit on the edge of my bed with the phone pressed to my ear, eyes closed, pretending he was sitting across from me, not miles away in another country. But over time, those gentle questions disappeared. The warmth in his voice cooled. He started calling less frequently, and when he did call, his words were rushed, distracted, like I was interrupting something more important. He would ask for money, not with shame or hesitation, but with a tone that expected it, like he was reminding me of a bill I hadn't paid yet. "Mama, I need 300 by Friday. My rent is due." "Mama, can you send more this time? I had to pay for a new phone." "Mama, don't ask why. Just send it, please." I used to feel proud that I could help him, that my work, even though it left me aching and exhausted, had meaning. But now, something about the way he asked, it felt different. He stopped saying thank you. He stopped asking how I was. He stopped calling me Mama. Sometimes it was just Maria, just my name, like a stranger. I kept making excuses for him. Maybe he was just stressed. Maybe the city had hardened him. Maybe he was surrounded by people who didn't understand what it meant to have a mother who scrubbed floors and ate soup made of bones and salt. Maybe he didn't want to feel different. So I told myself I could handle his distance. I told myself that this was temporary, that my love was stronger than whatever was changing him. One day I called, and he didn't answer. Then he didn't answer the next day, or the next. I began to worry. I imagined him sick, or hurt, or lost. I left voicemails. I sent text messages. I prayed. Then one night, just before I was about to sleep, my phone lit up. A text from him. "Sorry, I've been busy." That was it. 4 words. No apology. No explanation, just a cold wall built where a bridge used to be. I stared at those words for so long that the screen dimmed. I tapped the phone to keep the light on, like maybe the glow would warm me. After that, the calls became transactions. No questions, no stories, no laughter, just numbers and deadlines. I started keeping a notebook where I would write down what I sent, when I sent it, and what it was for. I didn't want to, but I had to keep track. The requests were getting bigger and faster. He once asked for $800 for a license renewal. When I hesitated, he snapped, "Do you want me to lose everything?" I wired the money the same day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unraveling between us, something sacred. There was one call I remember clearly. I had just come back from a job where I had cleaned an entire house after a party. There were champagne stains on the carpet, glitter in every corner, broken glass under the table. My hands were raw from the chemicals. My back screamed with every movement. I was sitting on the floor with my shoes off, staring at my swollen feet, when the phone rang. "Mama, I need 500 for my car. It broke down." I don't have that much right now," I whispered. "You always have it. Just send it. I don't have time for this." He hung up before I could reply. I sat there, phone in my lap, and cried for the first time in months. Not from exhaustion, not from pain, but from the realization that I had disappeared from his heart. He stopped calling me on my birthday. He stopped asking if I was still working at the same house. One day, I told him I had slipped on a wet floor and hurt my wrist. He didn't respond. Later, he messaged, "Did you send the money yet?" I began to dread hearing from him. I hated that feeling. I hated that I felt fear, not joy, when his name appeared on my screen. What if he asks again? What if I say no? Will he stop talking to me forever? Sometimes I would re-watch old videos of him as a child, videos where he hugged me, kissed my cheek, told me he loved me. I'd play them late at night, lying in bed with my face lit by the blue light of my phone, wondering if that boy still existed, or if he had been replaced entirely by the man he had become. If you know this feeling, if you've ever watched someone you love drift away and treat you like a duty instead of a blessing, share your truth. Comment with the words, "I deserved better." Your story matters. And if you want to stand with others who carry the quiet weight of being forgotten, subscribe to this channel. You are not alone in your ache. Love is not meant to be a transaction, but when it becomes one, something sacred is lost. And I had started to realize that no amount of money I sent could ever bring it back. The knock was louder this time. Not like the ones you hear when a neighbor stops by. Not like the soft, rhythmic tapping of rain. It was a command, a warning, a force. I sat up in bed before my eyes even opened, my heart already racing. There was no mistaking that sound. It was a sound that split the morning open, dragged the air from my lungs, and froze time. I lived alone. A tiny basement unit that smelled like bleach and dust, with only one small window facing the street. It was 5:13 a.m., I remember, because I looked at the blinking green numbers on my microwave as I stumbled out of bed, still in my nightgown, my slippers by the door, untouched. I didn't have time to put them on. Then came the second knock, harder, quicker, followed by a voice. "Immigration, open the door." I remember the way my hands trembled. I remember thinking I had to say something, anything, but my throat was dry. I didn't want to open that door, but I knew I didn't have a choice, so I did. And when I opened it, they were already stepping inside. 3 men, vests, radios, clipboards, no eye contact, no hesitation. One of them said my name like it was a file number, Maria Delgado. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I needed shoes. He just asked me to step aside. Their eyes scanned the room like they had memorized it. I realized then that they already knew everything. Where I worked, where I slept, where I hid my most private fears. They weren't here to ask questions. They were here to collect. I was too stunned to cry, too shocked to speak. I stood there, barefoot, gripping the edge of the table to keep from falling. The youngest officer glanced at me. His mouth opened, as if he were about to say something kind, or maybe just humane. But all he said was, "You need to come with us." Someone filed a report. A report. My mind spun, searching for logic. Who would report me? I hadn't done anything. I cleaned houses, I kept my head down, I paid for groceries in cash. I walked the same route, every day. I lived like a shadow. "Do you know who?" I asked quietly. The officer hesitated. That's when I saw it. The moment where sympathy tried to climb into his eyes before it was drowned by duty. "Family member," he said, then looked away. I didn't understand. My stomach turned, my mouth went dry, my knees felt like water. "A family member?" That's when he added it, almost like an afterthought. "They'll be compensated. $1,000. It's a new program." That sentence, those words, they shattered something inside me that had already been cracking for years. I wasn't just being taken away. I had been sold. $1,000. That's all it took. They didn't let me change. They didn't let me grab my coat or find my shoes. They told me to step outside. The floor was cold. My feet stung as they met the concrete. I was shaking, not from the air, from betrayal. The drive was short. I don't remember the turns, just the silence. No one spoke. The van smelled like plastic and metal. I stared at the small holes in the barrier between the front seat and where I sat. I counted them, anything to not fall apart. At the detention center, they processed me like I wasn't real. They took my picture, my fingerprints. They asked me to remove my earrings. A woman handed me a thin uniform and told me to change behind a curtain. The fabric felt like paper. I remember holding my arms out, staring at the sleeves, wondering how I got here. The bracelet they put around my wrist had a barcode. It beeped when they scanned it. I used to scan groceries at the store I cleaned for. I never imagined I'd become the item. Later, as they led me down the hall to the holding cell, I passed a mirror. I saw myself. Not Maria, the mother. Not Maria, the woman who worked 3 jobs and ate only 1 meal a day to save more money for her children. Not Maria, who sent birthday gifts wrapped in old t-shirts because she couldn't afford wrapping paper. What I saw was a prisoner. Inside the cell, there were others like me, women with tired eyes and stories etched into their skin. No one spoke loudly. We all sat in silence, the kind that says everything words can't. I sat on the bench, holding my arms tight around myself, trying to piece together how this happened. A family member. That word echoed, again and again. Family. someone I fed, someone I carried, someone I prayed for every night. Ooh, I closed my eyes and saw their faces, one by one. My youngest daughter in Guatemala, my middle son who worked construction, then Andres, my oldest, the one who promised he'd change our family's future, the one who had grown so distant, the one who hadn't called in weeks. A chill ran through me. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But deep down, I knew. The pieces were there, the coldness, the silence. The last time we spoke, he asked if I was still living at the same place, if I still worked for the same lady, if I had finally fixed my papers. At the time, I thought it was concern. Now, I saw it differently. It wasn't care. It was collection. He was gathering information, preparing the betrayal. I buried my face in my hands. I didn't cry. I had no tears left, just the heavy weight of understanding. My own blood, my own son, sold me for a check. If you've ever felt the knife of betrayal from someone you loved, someone you built your life around, share your voice. Leave a comment with the words "They took everything." You deserve to be heard. And if you want to hear more stories that speak the truth, so many of us are forced to live in silence, subscribe to this channel, not out of pity, but out of solidarity. Because the hardest part of being taken is knowing you were handed over, not by a stranger, but by the person you once trusted most. They handed me a folder, thin, light. It looked harmless, but inside, it carried the weight of my entire existence in this country. It had copies of statements, notes from interviews, printed emails, my name printed on the top in bold, black ink like a label on a box. It also had one more thing, the name of the person who had filed the report. I stared at the page for a long time, not fully breathing. My hands trembled as I held it. I read it once, then again and again, hoping it would change. Andres Miguel Delgado, my son, my firstborn, my reason for every pain I endured. My knees buckled. I had to sit down before my body collapsed under the shock. There it was, in legal print. The same boy who used to draw me stick figure drawings and say they were portraits of his hero. The same boy who once cried when I left for work because he said he missed my arroz con leche. That boy had grown up and signed a document that declared I was a threat, a burden, a disposable body. They say there is no pain greater than a mother losing a child. But I now believe that losing one who is still alive, who chooses to erase you, is even more brutal. A young woman working in legal assistance came to check on me. Her name was Luisa. She couldn't have been older than 25. She saw the paper in my hand and the frozen look on my face. She sat next to me without speaking. She didn't try to explain it away or offer false comfort. She just said, "Do you want to see what he wrote?" I nodded. She pulled out a printed copy of the formal statement he submitted. He had written in neat, calculated English. My mother has been living and working in the country illegally for over 2 decades. She continues to take jobs under the table, avoid taxes, and create a potential liability for those who associate with her. I believe it is in the best interest of the community for her to be removed. I stopped reading. I didn't want to know the rest. I didn't want to see how many words he used to bury me. Luisa placed her hand on mine. "I see cases like this more than you'd imagine," she whispered. "Sometimes, the people we love make choices that leave scars no one else can see. But mine were visible now. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so loud, I thought they would hear it through the walls. What broke me wasn't just the betrayal. It was how clean and professional he made it. There was no trace of hesitation, no doubt. He didn't just report me. He documented me. Listed details only a son could know. My old addresses, the schools I never dared to visit because I feared being asked for identification, the clinics I went to when I was too sick to keep working but still too scared to apply for help. He told them everything. I remembered something then, a moment from years ago. I had a fever and couldn't get out of bed. He was 15. He brought me tea and sat beside me in silence. Then he whispered, "One day, Mama, I'm going to take care of you." I believed him. I kept that memory close to my heart, like a warm blanket. And now, years later, here I was, in a cold room, holding the proof that he had handed me over for a few $100s and a cleaner conscience. Luisa gave me time. She said I could sit there for as long as I needed. I didn't move. I couldn't. My legs felt numb. My thoughts were spinning in circles. What had I done wrong? Had I loved him too much? Given him too much? Made his life too easy? Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe I had made him feel ashamed. Maybe seeing me scrub toilets and patch up the same old coat every winter embarrassed him. Shame is a dangerous seed. It grows quietly and strangles everything in its path. That night, back in my cell, I couldn't sleep. I sat upright, staring at the wall. I thought about the day he graduated. I couldn't afford a new dress, so I wore my nicest cleaning uniform and wrapped a scarf around my shoulders. I stood at the back of the ceremony, behind the crowd, afraid that someone would ask me who I was. When he walked across the stage, I clapped quietly, my heart bursting with pride. I whispered, "That's my son," under my breath. I remembered the small cakes I used to bake for his birthdays, made with whatever ingredients I had. I'd save the best slice for him, hide it in a tin, and write a little note. Te amo con todo mi corazón. I remembered how he used to fall asleep in my arms when the world felt too big, and I wondered, how does a heart turn that cold? How does love disappear so completely that not even a whisper remains? If you have ever had your heart broken by someone you carried, someone you fed with your own sacrifice, please speak up. Your story matters. Leave a comment that says, "I remember everything," because sometimes remembering is the only way we survive. And if these words echo something buried in your own life, subscribe to this channel. You deserve to be seen. Because when the people we love choose silence or betrayal, we must speak louder. Not with anger, but with truth. Because the truth still belongs to us. The holding cell never turned off its lights. They stayed on all night, buzzing softly, casting long shadows on the walls. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I realized it was intentional. They didn't want you to forget where you were. They didn't want you to sleep too deeply. Comfort was not part of the system. In the mornings, a tray would slide under the door. White bread, a bruised apple, a plastic cup of water. No coffee, no salt, just enough to say they fed you. I chewed slowly, not because I was savoring it, but because I needed to make the time pass. Minutes here stretched like hours. Days fold into each other like worn bed sheets. There is no calendar, only a growing numbness. One woman in the cell with me used to be a teacher in Honduras. Her name was Marisol. She spoke softly, always with a hint of elegance, even as her hands trembled when they brought us paperwork. She had tried to cross with her son, who was now being held separately in a facility for minors. He was only 6. She didn't know where. They hadn't told her. Another woman, older than me, said she had worked in a meatpacking plant in Iowa for 18 years. Her knees were swollen. She limped with every step. She had no one on the outside, no lawyer, no family. "I'm too tired to fight," she told me one night, lying on the cold bench, looking at the ceiling. Maybe this is where it ends. Each woman had a story, a journey, a reason, and a silence. We didn't ask each other many questions, not because we didn't care, but because in that place, the past became dangerous. Memories could undo you. They made your throat ache, your chest tighten. They pulled you back into the world where love still lived. And that kind of hope, that kind of softness, it was dangerous here. But I couldn't stop remembering. I thought of the first home I ever cleaned in the US. A 2-story house with cream walls and a garden full of lavender. I remember how the owner never looked me in the eye. She left notes instead of words. "Clean this. Don't touch that. Be quiet." I always was. I remembered the night I sent Andres his first real birthday gift, a pair of brand-name sneakers he had seen in a magazine. I had worked overtime for 3 weeks to afford them. I remember the smile in his voice when he called me. "Mama, you're the best." I held the phone to my ear for hours after we hung up, just to feel like he was still there. I remembered singing lullabies in the tiny bathroom of my apartment, so my neighbors wouldn't hear and think I was crazy. But I wasn't crazy. I was just a mother trying to keep her memories alive. Now, in that detention center, stripped of my name and wrapped in a uniform that didn't fit, I felt myself slipping away from the woman I once was. There was a mirror in the bathroom, cracked on the edges. I looked into it one morning and didn't recognize the face staring back. My eyes looked older. My cheeks were hollow, my lips dry and pale. But it was the look behind my eyes that scared me. It was emptiness, not grief, not anger. Just a blank silence that swallowed everything. They called me for an interview, a legal review, a chance to explain why I should be allowed to stay. I walked down the hallway escorted by 2 guards. The floor squeaked under my feet. Each step felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The room they brought me to had a table, 2 chairs, and a stack of papers. A translator sat beside me, and across the table was a man in a tie, holding a pen like it was a weapon. He asked questions, cold, quick, unforgiving. How long have you been in the country? What is your immigration status? Do you have any documentation of your children's dependence on you? Do you understand the consequences of unlawful presence? Each question cut like glass. I answered honestly. I told him I had lived here for 22 years, that I had worked under the table to survive, that I had paid rent, bought groceries, sent money home every week, that I had never committed a crime, that I had raised children who now had careers, lives, futures. I told him I cleaned homes most. People couldn't afford to walk past. I told him I had scrubbed floors until my knees cracked and my skin bled. I told him I was a mother, that everything I did was for my children. He barely looked up. "Ma'am," he said, "there is no legal basis for you to remain, unless you can prove a direct threat to your life if returned, or exceptional hardship to a U.S. citizen child. This case will proceed to removal." I wanted to scream, not because I didn't understand, but because I did. The law did not care about love, about sacrifice, about mothers who gave up everything. The law was a machine, and I was just a cog that didn't fit anymore. That night, I sat on my bunk and whispered a prayer, not for freedom, not even for mercy, but for memory, that somewhere, somehow, my children would remember me not like this, not as the woman dragged from her home in the middle of the night, but as the one who stayed hungry so they could eat, the one who sent packages of love across borders, the one who never stopped trying. If you've ever felt forgotten by the very people you lived for, your voice deserves to echo. Leave a comment that says, "I was never invisible," because you weren't. You still aren't. And if you want to keep these stories alive, if you believe they matter, subscribe to this channel. Together, we hold the memory. We carry the truth, because even in silence, we are still here, and the world needs to know. There was a moment when everything around me went still. Not because the world had stopped, but because something inside me had. It wasn't grief. I had already grieved. It wasn't fear. That had come and gone in waves. It was something else. A kind of quiet that only comes when the worst has already happened, and there is nothing left to protect, nothing left to lose. In the detention center, I learned how to disappear without dying. You train your face not to react. You train your hands not to shake. You train your voice to be soft, quiet, neutral. Not because you are weak, but because strength here has no use. It will not open doors. It will not change decisions. It only makes the fall harder when you realize no one is listening. I became invisible. Each day, a guard would slide open the door, call out names, shuffle people like folders. I started to watch who was taken and who returned. Some didn't come back. Some were processed, released. Others vanished into systems, numbers, case files. I waited. I prayed. I counted steps from one wall to the other, just to feel time moving. Then one morning, Louisa came back. She sat down, her face serious, her fingers holding another folder. This one was thicker. She said they had reviewed my case again. There was no pathway, no relief, no appeal that would change the outcome. I was going to be deported. The date was already set. She spoke gently, but I barely heard her. My ears were ringing. My heartbeat was louder than her voice. When she finished speaking, I asked her the only thing that mattered to me. Did he know what this meant for me? Louisa nodded. Yes. The paperwork includes a statement acknowledging the consequences. So he knew. He knew I would be removed from the only country I had called home for over 20 years. He knew I would return to a place I had fled, a place that no longer held my life, my future, my family. He knew, and still, he signed. That night, I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My body was still, but my mind was screaming. I saw his face everywhere. Andres as a baby, wrapped in a blanket I stitched by hand. Andres as a child, running barefoot through our village with scraped knees and dreams in his eyes. Andres as a teenager, speaking English with a perfect accent and correcting my pronunciation. Andres, now a man, erasing me with a pen. The next day, they allowed me to make one phone call. I didn't want to. I didn't know who to call. My sister was still in Guatemala, struggling to care for her grandchildren. My youngest daughter hadn't spoken to me in years, angry that I had left, but I had no one else. So I called the only number I knew by heart. Andres answered on the third ring. He sounded distracted, like he didn't have time. He didn't say hello, just, yeah? I froze. I tried to speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Finally, I said, "It's me." He didn't respond. Not for a long time. Then he said, "I know." That silence between us was louder than any scream. I Asked him why. I asked him what I had done. I asked him if I had made him ashamed, if he had needed the money so badly, if he understood what he had done to me. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He didn't apologize. He just said, "It was time to move on, Mama. You've done enough. Done enough." I hung up without saying goodbye. Those words haunted me more than anything else. Not the betrayal, not the report, not even the deportation notice. Just those 3 words, "You've done enough." As if love had an expiration date. As if motherhood had a time limit. As if sacrifice had a finish line. The days after that moved slowly. I spoke less. I ate less. I stopped counting steps. I stopped looking in the mirror. One of the guards asked me if I wanted to write a letter before I left. "Sometimes it helps," he said, "to say what you need to say." I took the paper. I took the pen. And for hours I just sat there, staring at the blank page. Then, finally, I began. I wrote not to Andres, but to the boy he used to be. The one who held my hand when he was afraid of the dark. The one who kissed my cheek when I was tired. The one who whispered, "I love you," before falling asleep. I told him that I forgave him, not because he asked, not because he deserved it, but because carrying that hatred would only finish what the system had started. I would not give them that. I would not become bitterness. I told him that I hoped he found peace, that I hoped one day he would remember the nights I stayed, awake sewing his uniforms by candlelight, the times I skipped meals so he could have seconds, the stories I told him in the dark to make him feel safe. I told him that even though he had erased me from his life, I would never erase him from my heart, and I meant it. Because the thing about mothers like me is that our love is not conditional. It is not for sale. It does not break, even when it bends beyond human understanding. If you know this kind of love, if you've ever had to choose forgiveness not because it was easy, but because your soul demanded it, share your voice. Leave a comment with the words, "I still choose love," because choosing love in the face of pain is not weakness. It is power. It is grace. And if these words reflect even a small part of your truth, subscribe to this channel. There is space for your voice here. Even when the world tries to erase us, we write ourselves back into existence, with truth, with memory, with love. The morning they told me I was leaving, I did not cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because there were no pieces left to fall. My heart had already shattered so many times that what remained was just a quiet understanding that some goodbyes come without hugs, without closure, without warning. A guard came with a clipboard, called my name like it was part of a list he barely glanced at. He didn't say good luck. He didn't look me in the eyes. He just pointed toward a hallway and nodded. I picked up the small bag they gave me. It held the clothes I was wearing the night they took me, my old shoes, a plastic comb, a folded paper with my name and deportation code printed in thick black letters. When I changed in the bathroom, I caught sight of myself again in that same cracked mirror. This time, I looked different, my shoulders straighter, my eyes more focused, not because I had healed, but because I had accepted the truth. The country I gave everything to had decided I was no longer useful. The son I lived for had declared I was no longer needed. They walked me outside. The sky was gray, the air heavy. I remember the sound of the chain-link gate as it opened. It was the sound of release, but not of freedom. They led me to a van. I sat by the window. I watched the roads blur as the city passed by. I tried to memorize every billboard, every crack in the sidewalk, every tree that lined the freeway. It wasn't just scenery. It was a farewell. At the airport, they didn't let me through the main terminal. I was escorted through a side entrance, away from the travelers with their rolling suitcases and vacation dreams. I was not a passenger. I was a file, a document being returned to its place of origin. They handed me over to officials like a package. No ceremony, no questions, just a signature and a nod. Then they walked away. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The air smelled different, thick with dust and heat. My feet felt strange on the pavement, like I was walking on someone else's path. A path I had left behind decades ago, never planning to return. I didn't recognize anything. It had been over 20 years since I last stepped on that soil. The streets had changed. The buildings were older, more tired. Or maybe it was me who had changed. I didn't belong to this place anymore. I didn't belong anywhere. They sent me to a shelter, a room with 3 bunk beds, peeling paint, and a fan that hummed loudly through the night. The woman at the desk handed me a blanket, a bar of soap, and a cup of rice. She didn't ask my name. She didn't have to. To her, I was just one more return. The other women there had stories too. Some had been deported after years in the US. Others had been caught crossing for the first time. We didn't talk much. We just slept, ate, waited, trying to figure out what was left of the lives we thought we had built. I called my sister. She cried when she heard my voice, told me to come stay with her. She had a room, she said. It was small, but I was family. I thanked her. I told her I would come soon, but I didn't, not right away, because I needed time to understand who I was now. I walked the streets of the town I had grown up in. Everything felt smaller. The trees, the houses, even the sky. I passed the church where I was baptized, the bakery where I once bought sweet bread after school, the alley where Eldest took his first steps, wobbling with laughter as I clapped and called his name. I sat on a bench near the market, watched the people go by, their faces full of stories I didn't know anymore. I was a stranger here, but no longer invisible. One afternoon, I bought a notebook and a pen. I sat by the window of the shelter and began to write, not just my story, but the stories of the women I met, of the mothers who were silenced, the workers who were erased, the hands that built countries that would never claim them. Page by page, I poured myself into those lines. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the ink ran dry. I wrote not for justice, but for memory, because memory is the one thing they can never take. I mailed the first few pages to a woman named Ruth, a teacher I used to clean for. She once told me I had a beautiful voice, that my stories deserved to be heard. I found her address in an old planner. When she received the letter, she called me. Her voice was warm, soft. She said she cried when she read it, said she wanted to help me publish the rest. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't an author. I was just a mother with a notebook. But maybe that was enough. One voice, one truth, one story at a time. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us speak, they will stop pretending we don't exist. If these words touched a part of your heart that rarely gets seen, let it be heard. Leave a comment with the words, "I still have a voice," because you do. And if you want to keep listening to stories that speak the truth many fear to say, subscribe to this channel. Let it be a place where silence is broken, gently but powerfully. Because when the world tries to forget us, we write ourselves back into history, not in headlines, but in whispers that turn into echoes, echoes that never fade. Every morning in the shelter began with the same ritual. A line for the shower, a chipped mug of black coffee, and a moment of silence before the day unfolded. I sat near the window, notebook in hand, watching the street wake up with the sun. It became my small sanctuary, that corner by the glass, place where I could breathe and remember who I used to be before the world decided I no longer belonged. There was a boy who sold oranges at the corner. He couldn't have been older than 9. Every morning, he set up a small wooden crate, carefully stacking the fruit like golden pyramids. His shirt was too big, his shoes too small, but he smiled at every person who walked by. That smile reminded me of Andres when he was little, before time and disappointment hardened his gaze. One morning, I bought an orange from the boy. He looked up at me with curious eyes and asked if I had just arrived in town. I nodded. He handed me the fruit and said, "Welcome back." I thanked him and walked away quickly before he could see my tears. That simple act of kindness from a child did more for me than any official document ever had. I started walking through the town every afternoon, not because I had errands or destinations, but because I needed to feel the ground beneath my feet. I needed to know I still existed in the world. I wandered through markets, small churches, public parks. I sat in plazas where musicians played broken guitars and women sold tamales wrapped in banana leaves. I listened to the rhythm of the city, the accents, the laughter, the pain. People live with so little here, yet they still find reasons to dance. That resilience, that stubborn joy, it began to seep into me like sunlight through a cracked window. One evening, I heard music coming from a small community center. A local woman named Marta was teaching dance to a group of teenage girls. Their steps were clumsy but joyful. Marta saw me watching from the doorway and waved me in. I hesitated, then stepped inside. She handed me a drum. "You look like someone who has a rhythm hidden in her bones," she said with a grin. I hadn't touched an instrument in decades, but as my fingers met the surface of the drum, something awoke in me, a memory, a heartbeat, a version of myself I thought I had lost. The girls danced, I played, and for a moment, we weren't broken or forgotten. We were music. Marta later told me they needed help with the younger girls, someone to teach them how to read, someone to listen when they were scared. I said yes, before she even finished the sentence. Not because I felt ready, but because I knew what it meant to be a girl with no one listening. I began spending my mornings teaching, not in a classroom, just a small room with plastic chairs and mismatched books. The girls called me Doña Maria. They hugged me after every lesson, their eyes full of questions and stories and hunger for love. One day, one of them asked me, "Do you miss the United States?" I paused, thought about how to answer, then said, "I miss who I was there," because it was true. I missed the version of myself that believed in a better tomorrow, the woman who cleaned floors with pride, who saved every penny for someone else's dream, who walked through snowstorms just to drop off a gift at the post office. That woman was buried under layers of shame and rejection. But these girls, this work, was starting to bring her back. Word of mouth spread. A local church invited me to speak to a group of mothers. They wanted to hear my story. At first, I was terrified. I hadn't spoken publicly in years. My voice felt like a fragile thing, but I agreed. I stood before them, hands trembling, heart pounding, and I spoke. I told them about my journey, about sacrifice, about silence, about the betrayal that changed everything. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just told the truth. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then a woman in the back stood up. She said, "You just told my story. I thought I was the only one." One by one, others shared their pain, their shame, their survival. And in that room full of strangers, I felt less alone. That night, I walked home under the stars and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe in a long time. I still mattered. I still had a voice. I was not just the sum of what I had lost. I was the seed of something new. If you've ever felt like your story was too small to matter, please know this. Your voice holds power. Leave a comment with the words, "My story matters." Let's remind the world that we are more than statistics. We are more than shadows. We are light. And if these words gave you comfort or courage or simply a reason to breathe deeper today, subscribe to this channel. Let this be our circle, our window, our heartbeat. Because every time we share the truth, we take back what was stolen, piece by piece, breath by breath, until we remember that even after everything, we are still whole. There is a strange kind of strength that comes after everything has been taken from you. It is not loud. It does not roar. It hums quietly in your bones, steady and solid, like a tree that has bent through storms but never snapped. That is what I became. Not healed, not whole, but rooted. Weeks passed. My life began to fill with quiet routines. The shelter was still my home, but it no longer felt like a cage. The faces around me grew familiar. Women who once cried themselves to sleep now laughed together in the kitchen, stirring soup and sharing gossip. We created something together that no one could deport or erase. Community. The girls I taught started calling me Mama Maria. At first, I gently corrected them, but eventually, I let it be. Because somewhere along the way, the pieces of my heart that had been crushed began to fit into new spaces. I was not replacing what I lost. I was growing something new. One afternoon, while helping a young girl named Jimena with her reading, I noticed she kept hiding her left hand. When I gently asked why, she showed me a burn, a fresh one, not from an accident. I knew the shape. I knew the silence in her eyes. I didn't ask more. I didn't press. I just held her hand in mine and said, "You are safe here." That night, I stayed awake thinking about her, about all the girls like her, silenced, hurt, pushed into corners. How many of them were walking the same roads I had once walked, invisible, afraid, carrying pain in secret. The next day, I asked Marta if we could start a storytelling circle, a safe space for the girls to talk, write, draw, not for therapy, but for release, for dignity. She agreed without hesitation. And every Saturday, we gathered in a small room lit by sunlight and colored paper. At first, the girls were shy. They wrote simple stories about animals and dreams. But slowly, the real stories came. One girl wrote about her mother's disappearance. Another wrote about walking through the desert for 3 days with blisters on her feet. Jimena drew a house with no windows. Then she drew a new one, full of light. I didn't read my story out loud at first. I just listened. I offered warm drinks and open arms. But one day they asked me. They said they wanted to know who I was before I became Mama Maria. So I told them, not the whole story, but enough. I told them about the night I crossed the border with nothing but a picture of my son and a rosary tucked in my bra. I told them about my first job scrubbing toilets for people who never looked me in the eye. I told them about birthdays missed, weddings watched from afar, and the long, aching silence of a child who stopped calling, their eyes filled with tears, not out of pity, but recognition. One girl whispered, "You're like us." And in that moment, I knew something had changed, not just in them, but in me. I was no longer waiting for someone to rescue me. I was no longer clinging to the past, begging for it to come back. I was living, I was building, I was mothering again, but differently, without expectation, just presence. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still think of Andres. I wonder if he ever regrets it, if he looks at old photos and hears my voice, if he remembers the woman who gave him everything, not because she had to, but because she loved him beyond reason. But I don't cry for him anymore. I light a candle for him sometimes, not out of anger, but out of hope. Hope that one day he will find the boy he once was, the one who drew hearts on my birthday cards and said I was the strongest woman in the world. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is remembering without letting it destroy you. And I choose to remember with softness now. If these words resonate with a place in your soul that has long remained quiet, speak it out loud. Let the world know that your healing is happening, even if it is slow. Leave a comment with the words, "I am growing again." Let us build a garden from our broken roots. And if you want to continue walking through these stories with me, subscribe to this channel. Let it be a place where silence is never the final word. Because every time we name our pain and share our truth, we become the authors of our own freedom. We begin again, stronger, wiser, braver, always braver. There comes a moment when silence no longer feels like emptiness, but peace. When you no longer carry your past like a wound, but like a woven cloth, soft and strong, full of threads that tell your story. That is where I am now, not healed entirely, not finished, but whole in a new way, a different kind of whole. The day I moved out of the shelter, I folded my few belongings into a small cloth bag, clothes donated by strangers, a new pair of shoes, my notebooks, now filled with pages and pages of truths I had once been too afraid to say. I walked out with no music, no applause, just the sound of my breath steady in my chest and my feet firm on the ground. Marta hugged me goodbye. The girls cried. They handed me drawings, notes, bracelets made from string. One of them had written, "You made me feel seen." I held that paper close to my chest and knew I had done something right. I moved into a room in my sister's home. It was small but bright. A single window let in the sun every morning, and the breeze carried the scent of mango trees from the neighbor's yard. My sister and I cooked together, laughed like we were girls again. She had missed me more than I ever allowed myself to believe. Some evenings, I sat outside with a cup of tea, watching the sky turn gold. Birds flew low across the rooftops. The town buzzed gently in the background. Life wasn't quiet because nothing was happening. It was quiet because I no longer needed noise to prove I was alive. One afternoon, I received a letter from the organization that helped me publish my first set of stories. They said my book was going to be featured in a magazine. A journalist wanted to interview me. I smiled as I read the words, but I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I had already cried all the tears of survival. These were tears of arrival. In that interview, they asked me if I had any message for women like me, women still living in fear, silence, or exile. I said yes. I said, "You are not disposable. You are not invisible. You are not too late. You are still becoming." They printed those words in bold, and when I saw them in ink, something inside me settled. Sometimes people in town ask what I do now. I tell them, I teach, I write, I listen. But what I really want to say is, I love loudly. I remember loudly. I live loudly. Andres never reached out again. I stopped expecting him to, but I also stopped building my future around his absence. I will always be his mother. That will never change. But being a mother does not mean disappearing. It means loving fiercely and still choosing to live. I joined a local women's cooperative. We host story circles, make crafts, plant gardens. We laugh often. Sometimes we cry. Mostly, we remind each other that starting over is not failure. It's courage. One day, a young girl came to one of our meetings. She looked nervous, eyes down, voice shaking. I sat beside her, held her hand, and said, "You're safe here." She whispered, "How do you know?" And I smiled, because I once asked the same thing, and someone said it to me. This is the power of stories. They travel further than pain. They reach into dark rooms and light a candle. They remind us that we are not alone, that our lives, however broken they may seem, are still full of worth, still full of beauty. To every person who has walked this path with me through these words, I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. Thank you for being part of this circle. If this story held your heart even for a moment, I invite you to leave a comment that says, I carry the light. Let that be our message to the world, that we are not lost, that we are not defeated, that even after everything we still shine. And if you want to continue walking through real stories of resilience, truth, and rebirth, please subscribe to this channel. Your presence here helps keep these voices alive, helps keep the light glowing for others still finding their way. There is another story waiting for you, just a heartbeat away. Click on the next video that appears. Let it hold you. Let it remind you, you are not alone. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until we meet again.